You are entirely too accessible, and that is why you are easily forgotten. Every time you answer a text within seconds, every time you fill a silence with your own voice, you are handing over the keys to your own mind. Human attention operates like a scarce commodity on a trading floor. If an asset is constantly flooded onto the market, its value drops to zero. Consider how the Medici family maintained absolute dominance over Renaissance Florence. They did not surround themselves with allies who were always available for counsel. Instead, Lorenzo de' Medici mastered the art of calibrated withdrawal. He would vanish from the public square for weeks during critical political crises, leaving ambassadors guessing, enemies second-guessing, and allies desperate for his reassurance. By making his physical presence a rare privilege, he forced everyone else to spend their idle hours trying to decode his next move. Absence is not merely a tactic of neglect, it is an active psychological factory that manufactures obsession. When you disappear from someone's daily routine, you stop being a current reality and become an unresolved equation. The human brain abominates cognitive voids. If you leave a conversation before it hits its natural peak, your absence continues to echo in the room long after you have walked out the door. Think about the last time a movie cut to black right before a major confrontation. That lingering frustration, that sudden jolt of empty space, is what keeps you thinking about the film hours later. People do not obsess over what they have, they obsess over what is slipping through their fingers. Yet, this is where most people fail entirely because they confuse absence with playing games. They try to calculate response times like amateur chess players, making their withdrawal obvious, clumsy, and transparent. The moment someone realizes you are deliberately ignoring them, the spell is broken. You shift from being a mysterious force to an insecure strategist seeking validation. Real scarcity must look like a life consumed by higher pursuits. You are not waiting by your phone, you are building something, experiencing something, living in a dimension they cannot reach. Notice how top-tier luxury brands operate. They never chase the consumer. They produce limited runs, close boutiques early, and let waiting lists stretch for months. They understand a foundational truth of human desire: we value things in direct proportion to the effort required to attain them. When you make yourself endlessly reachable, you are advertising yourself as a clearance sale item. Pivot for a moment from how you treat others to how you treat your own impulses. Why is it that you feel a physical itch to check your notifications the second they light up? Why does the thought of leaving a message unread for an hour trigger a quiet panic in your chest? You cannot occupy someone else's mental real estate if your own mind is constantly colonized by the trivial demands of everyone around you. You are addicted to the very accessibility that is destroying your leverage. The next time you feel the urge to over-explain yourself, to fill an awkward pause, or to reply instantly to someone who views you as an option, stop. Feel the discomfort of that silence. That exact friction is the breeding ground of obsession. But withholding your presence is only the first layer of the architecture. What happens when you finally reappear in their field of vision? Because you are always there, answering every text within seconds and offering your opinions before they even finish asking, you have become furniture. You are comfortable, dependable, and entirely forgettable. The human mind is an efficiency engine that stops processing constants. It only calculates variables. When you remove yourself from the equation without warning, you create a void that the human ego cannot tolerate leaving blank. Consider how the Venetian diplomats operated during the Renaissance. When negotiating a treaty, their ambassadors would suddenly cease all communication for precisely 3 days. They did not issue threats or express anger. They simply vanished from the court. Within hours, foreign ministers were inventing conspiracies, imagining insults that were never spoken, and rewriting terms in Venice's favor entirely on their own. The silence did the negotiating for them. This is what happens in a modern boardroom or a failing relationship when you stop explaining yourself. You say no to a request, and instead of adding a paragraph of apologies and justifications, you offer a single sentence and a hard stop. You leave the sentence unfinished in the air. Watch what happens next. Their brain takes your brevity and treats it like a puzzle. They replay the conversation while driving home, searching for a hidden meaning that was never put there. They ask themselves if they offended you, if they revealed too much, or if you are entertaining other options. You are no longer interacting with them. They are interacting with a phantom version of you that they created to fill the silence. This is the mechanics of the strategic void. Most people try to win influence by filling every silence with charm, every empty room with their voice. That is amateur leverage. True authority requires weaponized absence. Think of the last time someone left a text on read for 12 hours. Your pulse quickened. You checked your phone 3 times in 1 minute. You rationalized, blamed them, blamed yourself, and then checked again. That wasn't love or affection. That was your cognitive machinery trapped in an endless loop of self-generated justification, trying desperately to regain equilibrium. They are doing the exact same thing to you right now if you know how to step back. But stepping back requires mastering a specific kind of internal stillness that most people find terrifying. What if they forget about you entirely? What if the silence breaks and nobody is on the other side? That fear is the exact anchor keeping you ordinary. The moment you realize that people are not attached to who you actually are, but to the amount of mental energy they are forced to spend trying to figure you out, the dynamic flips entirely. You stop chasing. You stop over-explaining. You become an unreadable ledger. And yet, removing your physical presence is only the first layer of the trap. What happens when you are standing directly in front of them, looking them dead in the eyes, and your silence is not spatial, but behavioral? When you stop filling the silence, the other person's mind does something terrifying. It manufactures a villain, or a savior, out of thin air just to keep from starving for data. That frantic mental labor is the foundation of what Renaissance courts called the art of calculated inconsistency. You are about to learn why giving someone absolute stability is the fastest way to make them forget you exist. Think of a slot machine. If it paid out on every single pull, you would grow bored and walk away. If it never paid out, you would leave immediately. The exact mechanism that hooks a human brain into a loop of obsessive fixation is the unpredictable gap between reward and starvation. In 1950s behavioral laboratories, B.F. Skinner discovered that animals push levers with frantic desperation only when the delivery of food is randomized. Apply that exact, cold mechanics to human affection, and the result is intoxicating. If you offer someone a steady, reliable stream of warmth, you become background radiation. They know where you are, how you feel, and what you will say next. You are safe. And safety is the absolute death of obsession. To break that comfort, you must master the rhythm of the thermal shift. You engage them with fierce, undivided attention, making them feel like the only focal point in a crowded room, and then, without warning, you withdraw. Not in anger. Not with a dramatic exit. You simply vanish behind a wall of polite, chilling indifference. Watch what happens in a high-stakes corporate negotiation or a complex social dynamic when this happens. The target doesn't assume you are busy. Their ego instantly panics. They replay every recent interaction, searching their own behavior for a microscopic flaw that triggered the freeze. They spend hours, sometimes days, drafting and deleting text messages in their head, trying to solve a puzzle that you have already stopped thinking about. By shifting unpredictably between deep, intoxicating warmth and sudden emotional frost, you hijack their dopamine pathways. They stop evaluating your character and start trying to decode your patterns. You cease to be a person they know and become a riddle they are desperate to solve. And once someone's cognitive loops are entirely consumed by figuring you out, they no longer have the bandwidth to resist you. The danger, of course, is what happens when you hold the frost just a second too long, pushing them past the threshold of obsession and straight into cold, bitter resentment. A mind clings to an erratic reward because uncertainty mimics the thrill of survival, keeping the nervous system on permanent standby. But intermittent reinforcement is merely the scaffolding. Once you have their erratic attention, you need something far more potent to anchor them permanently to your frequency. You need the mirror distortion. Most people try to impress by displaying their own virtues. That is a rookie error. It forces the other person to be a passive spectator in your life movie. To make someone mentally obsessed, you must turn the camera around completely. You must become a pristine, silent mirror that reflects back their deepest, most unspoken desires, insecurities, and fantasies. Think of how Cardinal Mazarin managed the volatile French nobility during the 17th century. He rarely offered opinions or forced compliance. Instead, he listened with total, unnerving absorption, then casually rephrased his rivals' hidden ambitions back to them as if they were divine insights. Within weeks, hardened generals and cynical courtiers felt a terrifying sense of rare, exquisite validation. They did not just like him. They became psychologically dependent on his presence because, around him, they finally felt completely real. When you reflect someone back to themselves with absolute precision, you short-circuit their natural defenses. They mistake your strategic observation for soul-deep resonance. Let us shift the venue to a Tuesday morning boardroom or a high-stakes negotiation across a quiet restaurant table. Watch what happens when someone shares a subtle frustration, a half-formed ambition they usually keep buried out of fear of looking foolish. If you offer advice, you break the spell. You become an outsider. But if you lean in slightly and articulate the exact texture of their private frustration better than they can, their pupils dilate. You have just committed the ultimate act of psychological intimacy. They walk away from the interaction feeling uniquely understood, perhaps for the very first time in their lives. What they do not realize is that they are not obsessed with you. They are obsessed with the intoxicating version of themselves that only exists when you are standing in front of them. You are simply the mirror they cannot stop staring into. This creates a subtle, invisible leash. They will text you out of nowhere. They will replay your mundane conversations on their drive home, searching for hidden meanings, hunting for that rare high of absolute validation. They confuse your calculated silence with profound depth. Yet, relying solely on reflection makes you dangerously transparent. A mirror can show an image, but it has no weight. What happens the moment they realize the reflection is a deliberate construction? What happens when the mirror turns around and you are forced to stare into your own design? Your own reflection trapped in that skin is simply the price of admission when you refuse to give them a clean ending. Notice what happens the moment you provide closure. The mind exhales. The loop closes, the file is archived, and you become nothing more than a memory fading into the background noise of their history. Human cognition detests an open door, which is why intelligence agencies train operatives never to finish a debriefing neatly. They leave a single loose thread, knowing the target's brain will unravel the entire sweater trying to find the knot. You do not haunt someone by being unforgettable. You haunt them by being unfinished. Consider the composer who walks off the stage in the middle of the final movement, leaving the orchestra frozen with their bows raised just an inch above the strings. The audience sits in absolute silence, waiting for a resolution that never arrives, carrying those notes home in their heads for days. They replay the missing chord in traffic, in meetings, before falling asleep. The human nervous system is structurally incapable of letting go of an interrupted pattern. When you abruptly sever an interaction at its absolute peak, mid-sentence, mid-thought, right as the emotional stakes reach their boiling point, you hijack their cognitive processing. A senior diplomat once noted that during high-stakes negotiations, the side that abruptly terminates a session always commands the room for the next 48 hours. The other party stops analyzing the politics and starts analyzing the psychology. What did I miss? Why did they stop? What happens next? That frantic internal dialogue is an open window with no glass, and your presence blows right through it. You are no longer just a person they talk to, you become a permanent background process running on their mental hard drive, consuming their processing power while you sit in silence miles away. Think about the last time someone walked away from you while you were still mid-sentence, leaving an idea hanging in the air like smoke. Did you forget about it 5 minutes later? Or did you spend the rest of the evening rewriting the conversation in your head, perfecting your comebacks, wondering what they meant by that exact look in their eyes? That is the engine of obsession. It is not affection, and it is not admiration. It is the ego desperately trying to solve a puzzle that has no final piece. If you want to occupy someone's mind completely, you must master the art of the premature exit. Never overstay your welcome, never explain your absence, and never tie your interactions up with a polite bow. Leave the sentence hanging. Leave the door unlatched. But what happens when they finally figure out the game and stop playing along? An abrupt ending works precisely because the human mind refuses to let go of an unfinished pattern. When a master storyteller stops mid-sentence, your brain stays awake trying to supply the final syllable. But that same mechanic explains a devastating trap you fall into every single day. The moment you actively try to make someone obsessed with you, you have already surrendered the entire game. Think about what happens when you calculate your texts, stage your appearances, or engineer your mystery. You are no longer acting. You are reacting to an invisible standard you think they hold. You become a prisoner of your own strategy. During the Renaissance, Italian courtiers understood a counterintuitive law of influence that modern social climbers completely miss. If you walk into a room wanting to be noticed, your posture shifts, your voice tightens, and your eyes scan the crowd for validation. Even if you mask it well, human radar detects the scent of hunger instantly. It triggers a primal defense mechanism. People do not obsess over what pursues them, they hunt what escapes them. The moment your desire for their obsession becomes visible, you transform from a prize into a pursuer. You hand them the steering wheel of the interaction without them even having to reach for it. Consider how intelligence operatives are trained to handle double agents. They are taught never to display urgency, because urgency signals vulnerability. Instead, they make themselves completely neutral, entirely unbothered by whether the target cooperates or flees. That indifference is terrifying to an adversary. Let us shift away from geopolitical espionage and look at a mundane Tuesday night in a crowded bar or a high-stakes corporate boardroom. Notice the person who is trying the hardest to captivate the room. They are telling the loudest stories, laughing at their own jokes, constantly checking to see who is watching. They are working overtime to manufacture a persona. Now look at the person in the corner who is genuinely absorbed in their own drink or their own notebook, entirely unconcerned with the opinions orbiting them. Who draws the room's gravitational pull? The one who needs nothing. Obsession is never generated by trying to be interesting. It is generated by absolute, unshakable self-containment. When you stop caring whether they think about you, your nervous system finally relaxes. Your breathing deepens. Your gaze steadies. And that sudden, effortless detachment is precisely what registers to them as an intolerable threat to their own ego. They cannot comprehend why you are immune to their charm. They spend hours analyzing your silence, inventing reasons for your distance, and obsessing over your indifference, all because you finally stop trying to make them do it. But what happens when that indifference is no longer a tactic, but a permanent state of mind? That shadow is not empty space, it is a waiting room. When the hunter turns around and finds nothing behind him, his mind immediately begins to manufacture what is missing. Think of how chess grandmasters handle an opponent who is losing ground. They do not press harder. They stop moving entirely, leaving their pieces frozen in positions that demand an answer. That sudden absence of pressure forces the opponent to invent threats that do not exist, sweating over empty squares until they defeat themselves. This is the mechanics of the haunting silence. Most people fail to anchor themselves in another person's thoughts because they confuse presence with impact. They text too quickly, explain too much, and offer immediate relief whenever a conversation dips into discomfort. They act like open books with every page dog-eared and readable. To become a permanent fixture in someone's mind, you must become a closed door with muffled sounds coming from the other side. Consider how the composer Maurice Ravel structured his most famous piece, Bolero. He did not introduce new melodies or dramatic shifts to keep the audience enthralled. He repeated a single, hypnotic rhythm while steadily stripping away the instruments until a singular, piercing note hung in the air, forcing the room to hold its breath. The human brain cannot let go of an unresolved loop. When you introduce a provocative idea, a sharp observation, or an unexpected emotional pivot, and then immediately withdraw into absolute stillness, you hand them a puzzle with a missing piece. They will spend hours trying to carve out that final piece just to make the picture whole again. You stop chasing because chasing is a confession of need. You stop explaining because defense is an admission of guilt. Imagine sitting across a negotiation table from someone who has just made a high-stakes demand. Instead of arguing, negotiating, or blinking, you simply look at them for 3 seconds too long, nod slightly, and change the subject to something trivial. For the rest of the day, that person will replay their own sentence in their head, dissecting their tone, scanning for a hidden insult, and wondering what you saw that they missed. You did not attack them. You simply held up a mirror, walked away, and let their own paranoia do the heavy lifting. True psychological dominance requires absolute stillness after the trap is set. The most terrifying thing you can offer someone who wants to figure you out is an impenetrable calm. They will search for your anger and find indifference. They will search for your vanity and find quiet amusement. Eventually, they will stop looking outward and start inventing versions of you in the dark, trying to solve a puzzle that has no solution. Men are haunted not by the monsters they see in the light, but by the quiet footsteps they hear behind them in the dark.